Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Hasquin, and I'm back with more things you should know by being alive. And tonight I want to talk about Abraham Lincoln's House Divided speech. And I want to cover the context, the content of the speech, and then the impact on the Civil War and also on Lincoln's rise to power. So let's talk about it. We're looking at the United States as a country that's effectively on the brink. By 1858, the United States was deeply divided. The North was industrializing. It was experiencing a growing anti-slavery sentiment. The South remained largely agricultural, and it was very dependent upon slavery. The key tensions that were manifesting during the time were the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This angered Northerners because they were forced to return escaped enslaved people. Then the publication of the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, which continued to spread an anti-slavery statement in the United States. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, I did a video on it yesterday, of 1854. This effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise, allowed for popular sovereignty, and then eventually leads to Bleeding Kansas. And then the Dred Scott v. Sanford case in 1857, where Chief Justice Taney's Supreme Court ruled that Congress couldn't ban slavery in territories. It was effectively basically saying slavery was legal everywhere within the United States. So, the United States is headed for a crisis. So, all right. Who was Abraham Lincoln in 1858? He was a former Whig congressman. He served a single term in the House of Representatives representing Illinois. He was a lawyer, and he was a relatively respected orator and debater. He was moving on from some very cautious anti-slavery views to eventually seeing that slavery was morally wrong and also a national threat. And in 1858, Abraham Lincoln accepted the Illinois Republican Party's nomination to challenge Stephen A. Douglas for the U.S. Senate seat representing Illinois. So, Lincoln, his campaign kickoff speech was set for June 16th of 1858 in Springfield, Illinois. And he decided for this speech that he was going to make a bold moral argument rather than just a safe stump political speech. Lincoln understood a couple of things. One, that the nation was at a crossroads. And two, that the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision were both pushing slavery's expansion within the United States. So, the speech itself, Lincoln stood before the delegates of the Republican Party and declared, effectively, a house divided against itself cannot stand. He was quoting the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3, verse 25, and he warned the crowd that the country could not endure half slave and half free. It would become either all of one thing or all of the other. Lincoln argued that the slave power and courts were conspiring to make slavery legal everywhere. And he wasn't calling for immediate abolition everywhere, but for the stopping the spread of slavery. So, in his speech, some of the key points were, well, he traced the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision as steps towards nationalizing slavery. And he warned that Stephen Douglas's plan for popular sovereignty was all a facade. It was basically just something that allowed slavery to spread. And he began to emphasize moral clarity, that slavery was a cancer that must be contained. And so Lincoln's moral framing made the speech quite powerful. And it showed that slavery was not a local issue, but rather a national crisis. Now, the reaction to Lincoln's House Divided speech here was that many Republicans were quite shocked that Lincoln was so bold, and they feared that his message was too radical. Democrats, including Stephen Douglas, used the speech to kind of paint Lincoln as a dangerous radical. Abolitionists, though, appreciated the fact that Lincoln exhibited a degree of courage. Lincoln stood by the speech, and he understood that the moral truth was more important than a political caution. So, the House divided speech set the tone for 7 debates between Lincoln and Douglas across Illinois in 1858, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And the key issues during the debates were expansion of slavery into new territories, popular sovereignty versus federal authority, and the moral versus legal dimensions of slavery. Douglas argued for local choice on slavery, popular sovereignty. Lincoln argued slavery was morally wrong and should not spread. So, ultimately, Lincoln loses the Senate race to Douglas. He wins re-election because you have to recall this is prior to the 17th Amendment, and so the state legislatures are the ones that are responsible for picking senators, and the Illinois state legislature picks Stephen A. Douglas. However, Lincoln's speeches were printed and read all throughout the North in northern newspapers, and this elevated him to the status of a national figure in the Republican Party. So, the long-term impact of Lincoln's speech? Well, the House divided speech framed the slavery debate as a moral crisis and not just a political issue. It predicted that the coming conflict would be inevitable if slavery continued to expand. The speech also influenced the Republican Party to focus on stopping slavery's expansion. By 1860, Lincoln's rising reputation led to his nomination for president, with the House divided message still central to his campaign. So, why does a House divided matter? Lincoln's message was clear. You cannot sustain freedom and slavery side by side forever. The issue would force America to eventually choose its identity, either to be free or slave as a nation. His words remain a powerful reminder that compromising with injustice sustains division until a reckoning arrives. Now, Lincoln's House divided speech does show moral courage in a deeply divided time. It laid the groundwork for his presidency and the Union's stance during the Civil War, and it continues to teach us that a nation must confront its moral contradictions to survive. To close this up, to wrap it here, Lincoln's House divided speech was not just a campaign speech. It's a call for America to decide what kind of nation it wanted to be. It's a reminder that ignoring moral wrongs can only divide a nation further until a reckoning arrives. I do want to offer a little bit of additional information. Later on, in 1859, Lincoln will deliver his Cooper Union speech, and by this time he's more on the national stage. And for his Cooper Union address, he does temper the message. It's not as bold as his House divided speech had been in Springfield. And this was pretty much at the insistence of the Republican Party because of the need to get him the nomination as the party's candidate. And so therefore, his boldness was diminished but for the sake of party there. And so let's just remember that Lincoln was a political creature. And so seeking the nomination, he did temper his voice. If you learned something new today, if you like the presentation, please like, comment, follow, or share for more things that you should know by being alive. Because Lincoln's words still challenge us to confront injustice with courage. Thanks for watching tonight.